At 47, she thought life was over, then destiny knocked on her door. The snowstorm arrived the same night Margaret decided she had stopped believing in miracles. Wind howled through the empty streets of Willow Creek, carrying icy flakes that stuck to shop windows like frozen tears. Inside her small tailor shop, Margaret sat alone under a dim yellow light, staring at a half-stitched wedding dress. She ran her fingers over the delicate white fabric and whispered bitterly. "Love is for the young, not for people like me." At 47, Margaret had spent years building a quiet life in this cold mountain town. She stitched dresses for brides, suits for grooms, and coats for children, yet none of those happy moments had ever been hers. Her husband had passed away 15 years earlier. After that, life became a routine of survival. Work. Sleep. Repeat. No dreams. No hope. No love. Outside, the snow fell harder. Margaret was about to lock the shop when suddenly. Knock. Knock. She froze. No one visited at this hour, especially not during a storm like this. The knock came again, louder this time. Slowly, she walked to the door and opened it just a little. A tall man stood outside, covered in snow, his coat dusted white. His blue eyes looked tired but warm. "Sorry to bother you," he said, voice gentle. "My truck broke down, and I saw your light." Margaret hesitated. Something about him felt different. Safe. She opened the door fully. "Come in before you freeze." Inside, the stranger stamped snow off his boots and warmed his hands near the heater. "I'm Daniel," he said with a small smile. "I travel between towns, fixing ranch equipment." Margaret nodded. Margaret. Silence filled the room for a moment, not uncomfortable, just quiet. Daniel's eyes wandered around the shop, noticing rows of dresses, threads, and fabrics. "You make all these?" "Yes," she replied softly. He picked up the wedding dress she had been working on. "This is beautiful," he said. "Who's the lucky bride?" Margaret shrugged. "Just another customer." Then she added quietly, "I make happiness for others, not for myself." Daniel looked at her, really looked. Not at her age lines. Not at her tired expression. But at something deeper. "You know," he said gently, "sometimes happiness just needs the right moment to find us." Margaret almost laughed. Moments like that don't come at 47. Daniel didn't argue. He just smiled. The storm lasted all night. Daniel couldn't leave, so Margaret made tea. They talked about small things, his travels, her shop, the quiet life in Willow Creek. Hours passed. For the first time in years, Margaret realized she wasn't feeling lonely. She was comfortable. Safe. Alive. Before sleeping in a chair near the heater, Daniel said something that stayed in her heart. "Life doesn't end when we lose someone, it just waits for us to start again." By morning, the storm had cleared. Daniel's truck was fixed, and he stood at the shop door, ready to leave. Margaret felt something strange in her chest, a sudden fear of silence returning. "Well," she said softly, "safe travels." Daniel hesitated. Then he reached into his pocket and handed her a small folded paper. "If you ever feel like talking again," he said, "you'll find me at the ranch outside town. I'll be there for a while." Margaret took the paper. Their fingers brushed. And in that tiny moment, her heart did something it hadn't done in years. It raced. Days passed. Margaret tried to ignore the feeling. But every evening, she found herself staring at the paper. Until one snowy afternoon. She closed the shop early. Put on her coat. And walked toward the ranch. Daniel was fixing a wooden fence when he saw her approaching through the snow. His face lit up with a smile that warmed the entire winter air. "You came." Margaret felt shy, almost like a teenager. "I just wanted to return this," she said, holding out the paper. Daniel laughed gently. "You could have just thrown it away." She shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I couldn't." From that day on, Margaret's life slowly changed. She began visiting the ranch. They shared coffee, laughter, and long conversations. Daniel told her stories of places he'd seen. Margaret told him about the dreams she once had, dreams she thought were gone forever. And one evening, while snow fell softly around them, Daniel said something that made her eyes fill with tears. "You know what I see when I look at you?" Margaret shook her head. "I see a woman who survived pain, and still has a beautiful heart capable of love." She whispered, "But I'm not young anymore." Daniel smiled warmly. "Love isn't about age. It's about courage." Months later, on a quiet winter night, Margaret stood inside her shop once again. But this time, she wasn't stitching someone else's wedding dress. She was wearing one. Simple. Elegant. White. Daniel stood beside her, holding her hand. At 47, Margaret had learned something powerful. Life doesn't end when hope fades. Sometimes. It begins again when we least expect it. And as snow fell gently outside, she realized. The storm that once felt like the end of her story had actually brought her the beginning of a new one.